My name is Elena Torres, and if you had told me a month ago that I would be sitting across from one of the wealthiest men in the country listening to a marriage proposal that sounded more like a business contract, I would have laughed in your face. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when your family is drowning in debt and your father is battling cancer. It all began on a rainy afternoon in March. I had just returned home from another exhausting double shift at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. My hands were trembling as I sorted through the mail, and that is when I noticed the envelope. Cream-colored, sealed with red wax, and decorated with a golden crest that practically screamed old money. Inside was an invitation. Dinner at the Vista Terrace, one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York City. The sender was none other than Lawrence Carter, heir to a multi-million-dollar agricultural empire. A man whose name I had only ever seen in the financial pages of the newspaper. I showed the letter to my mother, Rosa. Her eyes widened behind her glasses. Lawrence Carter, son of Henry Carter, the ranch owner from Texas. She asked me why such a man would want dinner with me, a simple nurse from Queens. And honestly, I was wondering the same thing. Before I could even answer, the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood there holding a bouquet of white orchids, accompanied by a card. In elegant handwriting, the words made my heart skip. I hope you will accept my invitation. L.C. That night, as I slipped into the navy blue dress I had bought years ago for my graduation, I could not stop asking myself why a man like him would call for me. My younger sister, Isabel, whispered that I looked beautiful and asked if I was nervous. Nervous was an understatement. The Vista Terrace occupied the top floor of a historic building. The moment I walked in, I was met with a view of the glowing skyline and a man who took my breath away. Lawrence Carter rose to greet me. Tall, broad-shouldered, with strands of silver in his dark hair. His golden brown eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me blush. When he shook my hand, his touch lingered just long enough to send an unfamiliar shiver through me. Over dinner he revealed his truth. He needed to marry before his 40th birthday in order to inherit his family's company. He was 38. Time was running out. And then, he looked directly into my eyes and said it. Elena, I want you to be my wife. My wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. I told him we had never even met before. But he explained everything calmly, as though he had thought it through 1,000 times. He wanted a marriage of convenience. 2 years only. In exchange, I would receive $1 million, more than enough to cover my father's medical bills, our debts, and a future for my sister. The conditions were clear. We would live together in Texas, attend social functions as a couple, but we would sleep in separate rooms. After 2 years, we would divorce quietly, clean and simple. But there was one part of me, the part that could not stop replaying the warmth of his hand and the depth of his eyes, that was terrified. What if feelings did arise? His answer was sharp. That cannot happen. Not for either of us. And yet, as he escorted me to his car that night, the briefest touch of his fingers against mine made me tremble more than any kiss I had ever known. The days that followed were filled with restless thoughts. My father's health was deteriorating. The bills stacked higher and higher. And yet, in the quiet moments of my hospital shifts, I could not stop hearing his voice, calm and deep, asking me to be his wife. When I finally sat with my father, I confessed everything. His eyes grew heavy with concern as I explained the deal. Marriage for money. My father whispered that he would rather die than see me sacrifice myself. But as I held his hand, weak from chemotherapy, I asked him if perhaps this was not a sacrifice but an opportunity. He studied me carefully, and then he said something that changed everything. If this brings you even a chance of happiness, then maybe it is worth the risk. I called Lawrence's office the next morning. When I entered his building, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, my heart pounded in my chest. He greeted me with that same calm authority, dressed immaculately, every inch the man who controlled empires. I said the words before I could lose my courage. I accept. His golden eyes softened slightly, though his posture never faltered. We agreed on a few conditions. I wanted the first payment before the wedding to clear my family's debts. And I wanted the freedom to visit my parents whenever I needed. He agreed instantly. We shook hands to seal the deal, but the moment our palms touched, the same jolt of electricity coursed through me. The ceremony 2 weeks later was nothing like the weddings I had once dreamed of. No flowers. No music. No family celebration. Just a registry office, 2 lawyers, and a stranger who had suddenly become my husband. I wore a simple white dress. He wore a tailored suit. And when the official pronounced us husband and wife, I expected emptiness. But instead, I felt something else. A pull. The kiss was soft, fleeting, barely more than a brush of lips. And yet my knees trembled. His cologne lingered, rich and masculine, as if it belonged to me now. By the time we left the office, I was Mrs. Carter. A wife on paper, but something about the way he looked at me that day told me our contract was already more complicated than either of us had planned. We left for the Florida Keys that evening. A honeymoon in name only, yet the word haunted me. Lawrence had promised separate rooms, but the very idea of being so close to him for days made my heart twist in ways I could not understand. On the flight, I stole glances at him. The way he held his hands tightly in his lap, twisting his ring with his thumb. A nervous habit. A reminder that behind his controlled exterior there was a man carrying secrets. When I finally asked if he had ever been married before, his eyes darkened. Yes. Isabella. She died in a car accident 3 years ago. His voice cracked on her name. And in that moment I understood why he had been so determined to keep our arrangement free of feelings. His heart had already been broken once. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to follow his rules. There were stolen looks. Quiet conversations late at night. Moments when his hand would brush mine and linger just a second too long. I could feel myself falling into something dangerous. When we returned to Texas, life in the mansion was nothing like I expected. The staff treated me with cold courtesy. Social events felt like endless performances. And through it all, I played the perfect wife in public, even as I lay awake at night in a separate room, listening to the echo of his footsteps in the hall. And then one night, it happened. His defenses slipped. We shared a kiss, not for appearances, not for the contract, but for us. A kiss that tasted like longing and grief and promises neither of us dared to speak. That was the night everything changed. Because soon after, I discovered I was pregnant. The news shook me to my core. A baby was never part of the deal. I was terrified to tell him. When I finally did, Lawrence's reaction was unreadable. He stared at me for what felt like forever, then whispered that this changed everything. But before we could even process it, another storm erupted. My sister Isabel, the very person I trusted most, confessed that she had feelings for Lawrence too. She had been jealous from the very beginning, watching as I stepped into a life she could only dream of. And in her anger, she threatened to expose our contract to the world. The walls of our carefully constructed lie began to crumble. Paparazzi circled, whispers spread through the business world, and suddenly the arrangement that was supposed to save us all was tearing us apart. Through it all, Lawrence stood by me. Not as part of a contract, not out of obligation, but as a man who was slowly allowing himself to love again. And despite my fears, despite the chaos, I realized I loved him too. But love built on secrets is fragile. Would our marriage survive the truth? Would my sister's betrayal destroy everything we had built? Or would the child growing inside me become the reason Lawrence and I fought for something real? I will leave that question with you, my dear listeners. What would you do in my place? Would you walk away from a love born in lies? Or would you fight for the chance to turn it into something true? If you enjoyed my story, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means everything, and it helps me bring more stories of love, heartbreak, and hope to you.